Howdy, y'all. Welcome to Top 10 Garden Myths Busted. We're going to look at 10. Actually, we'll even have some bonus ones at the end. Isn't that exciting? This will probably be one of the shorter classes offered, but really, really challenging ideas here, especially if you are in the process of transitioning from more traditional garden design or just thinking about nature in more traditional ways, traditional narratives into more natural ideas. So let's get going. This is our table of contents here today. You can just skim through this real quickly. I'm not going to read through every one of these. Let's just get to the meat and have fun here looking at this stuff and just really rethinking pretty in our landscapes. All right, number one, wood mulch prevents weeds. I know I am starting with a tough one right here. Right? Everybody thinks that wood mulch prevents weeds, and to some degree that's true. Let's dig into this really quickly. So even if it's a 12-inch thick, if that's 1 foot thick pile of wood mulch, it's not going to stop weeds. Actually, weeds are going to love that because it's a very moist environment, very arable environment. Roots are going to love to establish in that. So you probably noticed if you have a pile of mulch and you leave it out there for several months, you have plants starting to germinate in there. Even a depth of 3 to 4 inches, which is commonly advised by a lot of traditional landscapers. Even just 3 to 4 inches is going to inhibit a lot of water and air transfer to the soil. Of course, wood mulch can float and blow away. We have a lot more urban flooding with climate change and extreme rain events. Certainly wind, if it's a more finely shredded mulch, that can easily blow away. Wood mulch will also keep plants in a perpetual state of establishment or near infancy, preventing them from sowing and rooting out. I mean, think about it. In these natural gardens, we want plants to roam around, create babies, create communities, get those layers and density in there, which is actually going to do a better job of competing against weeds, as well as just stabilizing the site, increasing soil moisture, providing more habitat, providing more flowers for pollinators and birds and all this good stuff, and reducing stormwater runoff. So if those seeds need soil contact and they need sunlight to germinate, and if there's mulch there, it's just not going to happen. We're not going to get the plant reproduction. We're not going to get the natural garden showing us and it fully expressing itself and allowing plants to and the entire plant community to fully establish and express themselves. So here are traditional beds now. Granted, at least that one on the right has its own issues, right? This is going to be in a parking lot. People are going to walk across it all the time. But, this is a space that is going to provide wonderful revenue for a landscape company crew every year because it's got to get mulched. And I'm sure there's a lot of pre-emergent herbicide in there to keep it looking clean. Frankly, why not just concrete it over? There's very little difference here. But we could have a lot of low-growing plants in here, and even if people walk through there and created a path, at least we still have a majority of plants left in that bed. On the left, there's just really no excuse for that, right? That needs to be a lot more plants. Nobody's going to be walking in there. This is outside a medical facility. People probably aren't going to be sleeping in there or peeing on there or having their dogs poop in there. So it's just not that kind of location. So we need more plants in there. We do not need to have recurring mulch applications. Put mulch down just once at initial install and keep it thin, 1 or 2 inches for annual weed control the first year or two, and then let that naturally biodegrade and let the plants self-sow and fully express themselves. Again, another parking lot. Oh my goodness, it's bleeding out. We got areas of mulch in here to just totally confound me looking at this picture. Don't know what's in those island beds. The mulch is just way too deep. Here we go. This is an early garden with just 1 or 2 inches of wood mulch applied at the time of installation. This is probably year 2. So still a lot of gaps here. This could have been planted more densely so that we could rehab and stabilize the site even sooner. But this is what it looks like going in. And this, don't come in and add more mulch. If some bare areas start to show, don't bring in more mulch. If anything, bring in more plants. Traditional landscape design looks a lot like this. It's like the house is going out there with its arms reaching out into the planet and being like, these plants are mine, 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 mine. I'm going to bring them really close up against the house and you can't touch them or see them or smell them or anything. But even more to the point, we have plants spread far apart. I guarantee you, in housing subdivisions like this with homes of this expense, folks are paying maintenance and management crews annually to come out and top off the mulch, to dress it up, quote unquote. And this is just going to continue to keep the plants, where they are, separated and not allowed to touch, not allowed to cavort and fall in love with one another. Granted, we have issues in this picture of, it's just all shrubs and where are the grasses, where's the matrix, where's the layering that we need to have a natural, resilient landscape that actually requires a little bit less maintenance than this kind of landscape would over time. Lots of issues, right? I'm throwing a lot at you. Speaking of depth, right? Look at that top right. Nope, that's a mulch volcano. That's going to kill a tree. That second image is definitely going to kill that tree in a couple of years. 3 is where you want to be. There's actually better ways to do this. But I mean, why do you want to have a mulch pile delivered to your driveway every year and then you got to break your back applying that mulch every year? It just does not make sense. It's money thrown away, money that could be better applied, better used to getting more plants into the landscape. Like this, right? Wood mulch does not ultimately prevent weeds. It is the desirable plant species that we choose that work together, that form intertangled, natural landscapes. We've got this matrix, this living green mulch, this ground cover of grasses in here, and then the flowers, the forbs emerging from it. With this density, with this sort of layering, it's going to be very, very hard for any weed seeds to have access to moisture, to nutrients in the soil, and certainly not to sunlight. So they're going to have a hard time germinating. Easier for weeds to germinate there on the edges, there in the front, where the lawn meets the plants, and any gaps that do occur as plants naturally come and go or die through time. Here's another shot of the landscape. Just again, this density is where we want. This is what we want in our landscapes. This is what low maintenance means. Okay. I know a lot of people are going to look at a landscape like this and think, oh my gosh, look at all those plants. I don't know any of those plants. How do I take care of these plants? Well, the density is going to do a lot of that taking care of things for us. Right, this is mulching. This is a shade bed here on a very busy sidewalk. This is Carex albicans, white tinge sedge, one of my favorite sedges. If you watch my other classes and webinars, you will know that I am constantly praising this sedge. It's got some geranium maculatum there coming out of it, and behind it a taller sedge, Carex sprangalii, Sprangel sedge. This is mulching. This is green mulching. All right, next myth, amending soil. This idea that we have to have this beautiful, loamy, rich, smells like heaven, I don't know, sort of soil in a landscape in order to have a garden. If you have a vegetable garden, right, you probably do want something like that. But again, you're going to be creating that soil. You're going to be amending those raised beds or whatever to the plant crop that you're going to have in there. You're going to be matching it to the pumpkins or the broccoli or the tomatoes or whatever that you're going to be growing in there. Here, it's the opposite. We are matching the plants to the site conditions. There really is no perfect garden soil except for the soil that you already have. A lot of people will go in and amend soil, and the number one way to do that is to till it up. But when you are tilling the soil, you're destroying soil structure and you're destroying soil life. You're literally carving and dicing up all kinds of soil microbes and larger species that live in the soil that are there to help amend the soil naturally over time, aerate it, and help water penetrate deeper in there. And besides, soil that's too rich, especially if you're using, I don't know, prairie or meadow plants, which a lot of us are throughout the country. You don't just have to live in the middle of the country to have prairie plants. Most of these plants are native in every state, and we have these meadow and prairie ecoregions in every state in the country. But if you have these prairie meadow species, flowers, and grasses. If you have a soil that's too rich, they're actually going to grow too tall, flop over, and probably not live as long because the soil is just too rich. It has too many nutrients in it. The plants will actually not like that, especially the prairie plants we tend to use, like you see in the image to the right. Plants are going to naturally amend soil over time. About one quarter or one third of prairie and meadow grasses like little blue stem, Cytodes grama, Indian grass, big blue stem, switchgrass. These plants, about one third or one quarter of their roots will die off every year. So that will naturally decay in the soil, naturally amend it. That's why we have, quote unquote, the breadbasket of the world or the country in the middle of the United States here, the cornfields and the soybean fields in the Midwest and Great Plains. Those soils are very rich, and they have been made rich by centuries and millennia of prairie roots dying and microorganisms converting that and just building the soil. And then, we have the foliage above ground too, right, that naturally decays over the winter and gets incorporated into the soil by all kinds of life. So you see these processes happening in your garden, especially when you see roly-polies doing their work, or earthworms, even though these species aren't native to the U.S. They're doing some work here, but there's all kinds of species and again soil microbes that are turning over the soil, um, incorporating that foliage, opening up the soil, doing the magic that we all want. Sure, you have seen this image before. Just some rough estimates here of root depth for some of these species based on studies and core samples taken. So, coneflower is going down about 6 feet, probably goes deeper than that. Compass plant is going down 14, 15 feet deep. You know, a lot of people will point to this image and say, this proves that these plants are drought tolerant because their roots are going so deep, and that's not actually what's going on here. It's actually much more about trying to compete with one another for general resources, but most of the moisture is towards the top of the soil here, the top few feet. So it's all about resources, and then balance sort of occurs when you have these different root depths. Next myth, plants need fertilizer, sort of an extension of amending soil. I mean, again, my God, why do you want to spend money on amending soil and break your back and hurt your knees, spreading all that and tilling it into the ground when you just match plants to the site conditions that you already have? And those site conditions don't just mean soil, right? They mean runoff and drainage and sun and shade. And is it on the north side? Is it on the west side? Is it on the east side? How's the space going to be used? Is it near a sidewalk? Is it near an electrical box? All those site analyses that one can do. So yeah, match plants to the site conditions and to one another. That matching to one another means that you don't have one plant that's really highly gregarious. It puts out thousands of seeds off of just a couple flower heads, and the seeds germinate really easy, and it sort of takes over and outcompetes everybody else. You probably don't want that in your garden bed. If it's around a typical house, couple hundred, couple thousand square feet, you maybe want that on an acreage where there's we're also trying to compete against more aggressive non-native or invasive species. Now, legumes do add nitrogen to the soil. So if you've done a soil test and you see that you need some fertilizer, you need some nitrogen, we'll put some purple prairie clover in there, some Dahlia purpurea, put in some Baptisia, put in some Lespedeza capitata. A lot of species out there that add nitrogen to the soil. Next myth, clean up in autumn, right? Our gardens are not like living rooms after the kids go to the bed. It's not time to put away the Legos and put everything back in the containers and boxes. It is time to leave the freaking garden alone. For hollow stemmed plants, if you cut them back, you're going to have water going down that stem to the root, to the root mass, and freezing over the winter, breaking open and killing the middle of the plant. If we leave our plants up, that will actually help snow gather around the plants, which can insulate them during cold spells. We tend to get a couple of inches, and then the next day temperatures drop 20 degrees. So those plants are working as insulation, working, when that snow is gathered around the plants, it increases soil moisture when that snow melts. And, you can also use plants too. So to sort of as a living snow fence, right, along a sidewalk or something like that. I hope you think these images are pretty. I just love the fall and winter gardens, what they look like, and there's still so many ecosystems they are providing. Just going out there on a cold day, hopefully when the sun is out to warm me a little bit, just seeing how the snow piles up on some of these seed heads, looking at the frost, uh, often disturbing birds that are hiding underneath the coverage, the density of these natural gardens. Of course, we have a lot of seeds in the seed heads still and on the ground for a lot of different species coming to use. And besides, in the fall, aren't you just tired? You spent the whole year gardening and weeding or doing whatever, or hopefully just walking around taking a ton of pictures of all the wildlife that are coming in enjoying your landscape. Don't you just want to sit back and have a cup of tea and read a good book and enjoy the view out the window of the plants that you left standing because, hey, brown is a color too, right? So be a litter bug. Leave those leaves there in your landscape every fall. Don't rake them out, rake them in. Heck. Okay, don't trust plant tags. That is our next myth busting. Plant tags are a great starting point, especially if you are also starting in a garden, but you really need to go and research these plants a little bit more online and in books, right? So in natural gardens, we're going to hopefully be using plugs, which are smaller, younger plants and establish a lot faster, and putting them on 12-inch centers because the goal is always to cover the ground as soon as possible. But plants are going to perform differently based on site conditions and even the region or zip code that they're in. I mean, plant tags really are not local. So if you go back and look at the previous plant tag image, uh, you know, there's only so much information on there that's helpful. It's very, very basic information. It might not be tuned to your zip code and certainly not to the exact conditions you have going on in your landscape. Here's a garden being laid out here. A lot of Carex albicans in here too, white tinge sedge, and it's going to perform a little bit differently in dry shade than it will in dappled sunlight, than it will with even more sunlight and a little bit more consistent moisture. It's going to establish faster in dappled sun or with a little bit more moisture than it will in totally dry, shady conditions. Um, and even clay soil, it will take a little bit longer to fully establish than it will in a clay loam. So, do plant tags tell you that? No, they can't. You need to research reliable websites and a few guidebooks that you come to rely on as you gain experience and practice in creating these natural gardens. Another garden here starting out again, just a 1.5 or so inch layer of wood mulch, which is helping us mostly with crabgrass and foxtail, so annual weeds whose seeds are going to be probably on the soil surface or just below and need that sunlight to fully germinate. Everything here is planted 12 to 15 inches apart. Got lots of grasses in here forming the matrix or living green mulch, and then masses and groups, drifts of different forb species blooming from April through October here placed among the living green mulch, creating that density, in the layers. Here's a sown project. We have early succession species here. This is like year 2, I think, or maybe even year 3. Monarda fistulosa, wild bergamot blooming there. The year prior, we had a ton of Rudbeckia hirta, black-eyed Susans. So in sown projects, seeding projects, and our mixes, we're planning for this sort of succession, and this density and this thickness is what's going to help compete against weeds and naturally amend the soil over time. So again, the first year or two, it's Rudbeckia hirta, black-eyed Susan. That's covering the ground really thick. Rudbeckia hirta gives way. It's just a biennial. It's done its thing after 2 or 3 years, and then Monarda comes in. Gray-headed coneflower, Ratibida pinnata comes in. Other early succession perennials, and then those will eventually give way to other perennials that come online after 4, 5, 6 years. And all this time, we're making sure the density is there, the thickness is there to outcompete weeds, stabilize the site, shade the soil, increase soil moisture, provide habitat, all that wonderful natural garden stuff. By the way, maybe this is a bonus myth here. Native plants are not drought tolerant. They are not magical beans. I hear this all the time, even in well-known publications, well-respected publications. Writers saying, hey, native plants are drought tolerant, so use them. That's a load of bupkis, right? We need to match plants to the site conditions. If you put I don't know, swamp or red milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, which likes more consistent soil moisture conditions. If you put that into a sandy loam or lush soil on a hill or a slope in full sun, it ain't going to be happy there. It's not going to be drought tolerant. It might be native to your zip code or your ecoregion, but it's not going to do well there, right? So every plant must be properly matched to the site conditions, and that's on you. And again, a plant tag is not going to give you enough information there, especially if you're trying to use plants locally native to you. And this again is an extension of those plant tags, which are again unreliable. I'll just keep throwing. I know. Why? How am I supposed to choose plants, right? Well, okay. So you live in eastern Kansas. That's the same USD hardiness zone as southern New York State. But oh my God, those are totally different climates, right? You might be using the same native plants, very likely, but totally different climate, totally different weather, soils, all this stuff. Because hardiness zones measure just one specific plant growth attribute, and that's cold weather tolerance, right? What are the coldest weather temperatures that it can probably survive and handle in the winter? This makes sense, I think more sense for imported non-indigenous species that we're bringing into the country, helping us match them, even though those plants obviously are also going to need to have a little bit more research and exploration on them. Of course, there's also heat tolerance and syncing blooms with the wildlife that co-evolved to use them. Not to mention hydrology and all the other things we've already sort of talked about today with site analysis. Again, this is just very basic presentation, but you can get more in depth with these with the other classes that we offer. So in order to make more resilient and sustainable choices that also help more wildlife, we have to look at gardening by zip code and ecoregion, keeping it local. So here is a level 3 ecoregion map that the EPA has. There are 4 levels. Level 1 is super basic. It's like USD hardiness zone basic. Level 2 gets a little bit more zoomed in. Level 3 I think is the best medium. Level 4 tends to get a little bit egregious. I think that's the next slide. So here you can see, like, I'm over in Lincoln, Nebraska right now recording this class, and that's ecoregion 47, right? So you can see there, it's not stretching all the way to the other part of the country to the East Coast, even though we have a lot of the same native plants because of glaciers. Well, we shouldn't get into that right now. That's too much for this presentation. Here's level 4 on here, so you can see it's getting even more finely detailed. Now, if you are going to be using local ecotype plants or seeds, so these are plants that gathered from very local populations because you're trying to keep it very local in your plant selection, then this map, level 4, would be the most helpful for you. But that's another conversation. That's another rabbit hole to go down. So if you have weeds, you should pull them by hand, right? That's what everybody says. You don't want a weed in your landscape, or do you? Pulling weeds disturbs the soil and brings up new weed seeds that were buried in the soil until you pulled that plant. Oh, site disturbance is the number one issue that we have where we get weeds. That means if you're drilling or digging a hole for a plant, fire moves through, flood moves through, disease moves through, and knocks back a plant population and leaves bare exposed soil. Any kind of disturbance is going to create a new weed population. Now, if you have noxious or invasive weeds, you might have to hand pull them, especially if you do not want to or are unable to use a specific chemical carefully targeted to that plant specimen. Foxtail and crabgrass, again, these are annual weeds. They're going to vanish after the first year, definitely after the first year, the second year, especially if you planted densely in your landscape and those plants are establishing well. And sometimes, weeds are just nature trying to scab or heal over the wound, right? So not all weeds are necessarily bad. I think about dandelion. I think it's a pretty beneficial ground cover to have in your matrix or living green mulch natural garden. People people abhor dandelion because we associate it with this plant with these big old leaves and this big old flower and these big old white seed heads that pop up in a lawn and sort of ruin the harmony or cadence of this monoculture lawn, right? We have all these chemicals, um, all this pre-emergent herbicides that we put on our lawns to make sure we keep lawn just lawn. That's the thing about lawn, right? It's incredibly dependent on just a crap ton of maintenance, all these different chemicals and the watering and the top dressing and the dethatching, right? It is a little baby that is constantly screaming to have its diaper changed, to be fed, to be whatever, right? I mean, how much time do you have? You don't have all the time in the world. So if nature is trying to heal itself over, we can trying to scab itself over, heal itself, we can use plants on purpose, desirable species that we want to have in there, and have them do the work of healing the site, or we can work in concert with some weeds that actually pop up, which is kind of tricky, right? You don't necessarily want to see or have foxtail or crabgrass in your pristine garden that you just spent a lot of time and money on. But those are going to vanish over time, and maybe they're useful the first year. They are going to work the cover and shade the ground and outcompete other weed species that then won't be able to germinate because the crabgrass and foxtail is in there. Although I have had a difficult time convincing at least one weed inspector of that in a first year garden, but we have had success with other landscapes. So batting about 800 on that argument. This is a pretty large bed in front of a home. Do you really want to hand pull every weed that comes up in here, or would you rather just plant densely and maybe put down 1 inch of wood mulch at planting at install? Not saying every garden is going to be this, that sort of magical thing where if you do plant densely and you do put down just a little bit of wood mulch, you're not going to have weeds. We never know what's going to pop up in a landscape after we go in and disturb it through the act of planting. We've had landscapes where we have practically no weeds, and then we have landscapes where it's like pristine lawn, highly managed, really taken care of. We kill off that lawn, plant the landscape, and we have a bonanza of weeds, and it's just like, where did all this stuff come from? It's amazing how long weed seeds can lay dormant in the soil. I showed you earlier a picture of wild bergamot Monarda fistulosa as sort of a mid-succession perennial. Well, and I mentioned the Rudbeckia hirta, and here's Rudbeckia hirta here in the God, this maybe was even the first year already. So it's a biennial, right? So it is covering the ground. Where the Rudbeckia hirta was thickest in this landscape, we had much, much less weed pressure. Again, this was a sown landscape, so different cost versus plugs. But where the Rudbeckia hirta struggled, in specific areas, especially where we had a lot of runoff coming off the parking lot, and it couldn't really do well. It was too wet, or seeds got washed away. Where the Rudbeckia hirta did not establish well, we had a lot of weed pressure, like crown vetch, which is really something you don't want to have. So that's just showing you the difference. All right, next myth to bust here today. Are you enjoying these? I mean, it's not as exciting as a TV show that was on the Discovery Channel, right? We're not blowing up cars or anything, but hey, man, maybe we should convert lawns by blowing them up. No, don't do that. Okay, that was a dumb idea. All right, so clover lawns help bees. That's all the rage right now. It's the deal with, and we're probably talking Dutch white clover here. The deal is it's still very much a monoculture. Maybe you have Dutch white clover and tall fescue. Well, great. I mean, as natural gardeners, aren't we trying to get away from these more simplified landscapes? Yes, we are. Now, Dutch white clover co-evolved with honeybees, so it's mostly honeybees that will be using it because they recognize it and, just they grew up with it. Honeybees don't need saving. We'll get to that in a couple of slides. So what happens? I mean, and what happens when you step on these bee lawns or clover lawns, and then What, you're smashing some bees, smashing some spiders? I don't know about that. And you certainly don't want to be doing that barefoot. Adding even more diversity to the lawn still produces lawn. You could throw in some strawberries, all right, you should throw in some violets, but you still have this really relatively short landscape, right? Even if it's all native ground cover plants, you're probably going to have to come in and mow it. And then when you're mowing it to keep it short, because it's still a lawn-like landscape, because that's what you want probably in that space, even if it's like a pathway between a more diverse, taller garden, you're going to come in, mow it. You're going to cut up so much stuff, right? Grasshoppers and spiders and beetles and bees and God knows what else. It's better just to reduce the lawn to what you really need to have. And it's not a kid's space. Whoop, shouldn't go there. Less lawn, more planet, right? Even if you're the only one on the street, man, you are the empowerment. You are the hope. You are the beacon. You are giving permission for other people to try. And boy, are you going to be a wildlife haven. All right, here we go. I promised it a couple of slides. Honeybees do not need our help. Our next myth to bust. They are an agricultural issue. They are not an ecological issue, especially here in the United States. We're not in Europe or Asia. So, I mean, to help grassland and songbirds, should we be raising more chickens in our backyards? That's sort of the comparison, this nonsensical comparison to make here. Honeybees actually steal resources from native bees while spreading disease, and our native bees are far superior pollinators that need more diverse landscapes, not monocultures to be trucked around to like honeybees are, right? Because honeybees are put on a truck, stressed out, driven across the country, put in an almond field, put in a sunflower field, I don't know. And they're packed up again, stressed out, driven a couple hundred, couple thousand miles to the next stop. I mean, oh my God, right? So there's a lot of resources on the website in the free article section. A lot of links there in one of the articles on honeybees to scientific studies, to research showing, you can just go through each one showing how honeybees are actually, man, they're really problematic and that you don't actually want to see them in your landscape. So I sort of hear been talking about this. So, Almond Xerxes Society looked at this many years ago. If we had hedgerows and thickets and underplanted almond groves, it probably work for apples too. If we had underplanted those almond groves with meadows and wildflowers, we have we'd have more yield. We wouldn't need to truck in honeybees. Wouldn't have to use as many pesticides because we have beneficial predator bugs in that landscape as well, wasps and stuff going around taking care of things for us. The STRIPS program, based was it Iowa State, I think. Corn and soybean fields that take out just like I think it was 10% of their field production, convert it to strips of prairie, actually see increased yields, reduced runoff, reduced soil blowing away or flooding away. It doesn't take very much, right? Your costs are recouped and then some. This is beekeeping, guys. It's not having a hive on your back porch. It is having plants instead of lawn. More diversity, the better too. There are some bee species that prefer shrubs and groves of trees and some that prefer open meadows. Just depends. So have a diversity if you can. You can certainly pull that off even on a small 8,000, 10,000 square foot suburban lot, right? A couple of shrubs here, tree or two there, meadow here, bam, you've got diversity. And if all your neighbors are doing it with you, you've got, you've got extended habitat. All right, another myth to bust here today. Don't spend your money on larger plants. Even if you're mega rich and you want to have that mega mature look right away, don't do it, please. Forb and grass plugs are going to establish quickly because they have less transplant shock. They can root out sooner into the site soil, right? You think about plugs. I should have had a picture here for you, but you're probably familiar with them if you're watching me here today. Plugs, they're not in a 1 gallon container. So their roots are going to be touching the soil practically immediately. They're going to be those roots are going to be touching the site soil practically immediately. Smaller trees and smaller containers catch up to larger trees in roughly 5 to 7 years. Sort of depends on the tree species, how fast they grow. Seen this time and time again. I'm thinking about American elm trees. I like to use the Princeton cultivar, which is a sport of our native American elm. We will use, God, I think like 5 gallon trees, and yeah, they are super, super tall after 4 or 5 years. Bold and burlapped trees, those things are scooped up out of the ground in the field that they're growing in, and it's killing what 70, 80%. I don't know what the percentage is, killing pretty much all of the feeder roots, because roots go out 2 times the canopy drip line, right? So let's say the canopy goes out 5 feet from the trunk. Roots are actually going to be going out 10 feet. And that big old digger machine comes in there and scoops out the tree, and the spades are going really pretty gosh darn close to the trunk. So think how many roots are being cut. It's going to take years and years and years until that tree can get the roots back out, and then it'll finally start growing again. So smaller is better. It's cheaper. You can get more. Just do it. And most trees like to be underplanted with plants anyway. Okay. Uh, sure, I guess you could put down a little bit of wood mulch. Part of that is to keep mowers and trimmers away from the trunk, and because that can certainly damage those trees and kill them. But they plant, you look at trees wherever they're growing, forests or even in savannas, there's plants all around them, all underneath them. Birch especially like to have cool root zones, and having that soil naturally amended with lots of plants underneath them. Birch love that. Flowers and sedge and grasses are not going to steal resources from the tree, but they're actually going to help regulate temperature and moisture and build soils. Trees love to have plants underneath them. You do not hurt a tree by having plants underneath them. You're trying to build a community. Plants love to be in a community. Hopefully you do too. I sometimes do. It depends on the time of day. Any time before 10 a.m., I do not like to be in a community. Underplantings also provide soft landings for insects and bugs that feed on tree foliage and then drop to the ground to pupate, create a chrysalis, create a cocoon. So we're thinking butterflies and moths here, right? Oak trees are well known to be a mega host plant as far as deciduous woody plants are concerned. So oak trees are going to have a lot of larvae doing their thing up in the canopy or dropping to the ground to do their thing, and in the ground plane where they can get some coverage with tall grasses and flowers. So plant, more plants. You have my permission. Tell your spouse, guy on the class said, to get more plants. All right, let's cover a few bonus myths or ideas. I think I don't know, this, you might be watching this class years and years from the time that I'm recording it, and we might not have no mow May anymore. I frankly hope we don't have no mow May this year, but it's still around. When you stop mowing your lawn, weeds are going to appear. It's just going to happen. It's very unlikely your urban lot or suburban lot has a native seed bank in it. Okay, it's going to be weeds, and they're going to be, and there's a decent chance that there'll be invasive weed species. But the space is certainly going to look unkempt and messy and crazy to your neighbors. And I know there are natural gardeners out there that are like, oh, good. I'm trying to build a habitat here. I'm trying to get bird coverage and feed wildlife. It's got to look a little quote unquote messy. And I'm like, that's not the olive branch you probably want to be giving to people, especially people who are just thinking totally not on your wavelength, right? Got to meet them a little bit in the middle. You got to move over just a little bit, and it doesn't take that much moving. Right? Just maybe having a little bit of design intention through the space. When you start mowing your garden again, so let's say you stopped mowing in May, or if you're in the south of the United States, you probably stopped mowing in April. So you stop mowing for a month, you come back in, and you're going to mow it all back down. Okay, you are going to reduce the vigor of your lawn now. The lawn has spent all of its resources on putting up all that growth, and maybe even starting to seed out, which requires a ton of energy. It's used up all of its root reserves to grow taller, and then you're just whacking it back down, and you're totally weakening it, which means you're going to have gaps open up in the ground plane for more weeds to come in. Now, if you're converting your lawn, that might be one method to go to make it patchy, so you can bring in seed or plants and plant it in amongst the lawn. Larry Weiner's daughter has done some research into that. You can probably go on an internet search and see the New York Times article on that process. There's many ways to convert a landscape, depending on how nice you need it to look and how soon. Ticks, that's a big one, right? Well, if I have a natural garden, if I have taller plants, I'm going to have ticks, right? I think I'm just going to read this to you. I copy and pasted this from the website, so it's there. As human encroachment in the wilder areas brings us into more contact with other species, and as climate change helps some populations to increase and foster new diseases, ticks are certainly a valid concern in more natural wilder landscapes. That being said, several studies show that ticks prefer woodland and woodland edge habitat especially. Prairies and meadows are too sunny and dry. Other studies show that a tall lawn is poor tick habitat, while a lack of plant and animal diversity leads to an increase in tick-borne disease spread. So we actually need more plants and more habitat, not less, to create a safer environment. This is all about trophic cascade, right? We need predators of these species that we consider to be more problematic. Of course, the overarching theme here is that climate change is going to increase tick populations and disease. We are seeing this a lot now. The benefits of contact with nature are innumerable, though, both physically and emotionally. So, as with anything, there are best practices to employ in our landscapes around our homes and businesses and churches. Spraying down clothing and performing tick checks after coming inside are some of the actions you can take no matter where we venture outside. Also, a good idea is designing your space to have wider walking paths so you're less likely to brush against foliage where ticks are questing, right? Because ticks are going to be out there on the edge of a leaf, edge of a branch with their front legs out, just ready to hook onto something. So if you've got a 6-foot wide path instead of a 2-foot wide path, you can walk down the middle of the path and reduce your chances significantly. Of course, ticks hitch rides on animals, and so you'll see ticks at your front door or in the middle of your driveway or on your garage door. And I'm thinking of places we've seen them. So they hitch rides. They will be anywhere. The benefits of nature and the things that are going on with a more natural landscape are just off the charts. But it still doesn't mean, there aren't things that we can do to be smarter about design and management. Stings and flower allergies. I was once on a garden consult where the potential client, person who did not become a client, said we could not use flowers along the sidewalk because they were scared their kids were going to get stung. I don't know if they had allergies or not, but I'm going to guess no. But the thing is, most natural garden myths come from totally valid concerns. Of course, they also come from chemical companies wanting to scare us, right? Nature's out to get you and kill you, so use a product that is also going to kill you, make you sick. Did you know that most of our 3,500 native bee species are solitary, meaning they have no hive to defend and thus aren't easily agitated? Bees are almost always very hesitant to sting. They don't want to do that. They'd rather keep eating, right? Bumblebees will even lift their middle leg or middle finger. I almost said middle finger, but it's the same thing, middle leg, to let you know you're too close. And never grab a bee. I don't know why you would do that. Don't do that. Also, it's only the female bees that can sting, and some of them don't even have stingers, just ovipositors. That's how they lay eggs, and they have a sharp barb that they might use if you reach out and grab them. It'll feel like a sting, but you're not going to have the after effects of the sting. As for plant allergies, most flowers have sticky, heavy pollen. Think like goldenrod, which is often blamed for hay fever, but it's actually ragweed. So the heavy pollen, it's not windborne, so you don't get that allergic reaction unless you just, take the flower and rub it all over into your face. So there's a lot of examples here. Now, of course, if you are allergic to bees, wasps, or whatever, or allergic to specific pollen from a specific plant species, absolutely, you got to be taking some precaution. Totally makes sense. And I think you can still have a very natural landscape, just being aware of how the planting is and choosing the specific plant species that are right for you. Look at that cute bumblebee. I mean, come on. Look at her go. There's a tiger swallowtail on a joe pye wheat. So yeah, anyway, plant something. I dare you. I know you are. No, you're going to. That's our myth busting day here today. Ooh, look at that. Lasted 45 minutes. Super. So again, I think if you pair this with all the other classes sort of as a baseline to go in, you're ready to change the world, ready to rethink putting in our landscapes, and I appreciate the work you're doing. All right. Peace out. Prairie up.